Here's a piece of rough sawn cherry, and what I normally do is avoid the sapwood because for my cabinets that I built, it was all heartwood. So on the surface here it looks like you have a lot, but actually it won't work for my cabinets because it only goes, like there's just a thin strip of heartwood here and then it disappears. You can see along the edge. And then on the back it's just all sapwood. So it's hard to do a project like that that requires all heartwood. So what I thought I would do was repurpose this board and make a cutting board out of it, an end grain cutting board, and then highlight these variations and add some interest to the cutting board. So the first thing I'm going to do is see how much of this I need to cut up in order to make the cutting board. And I'll probably have to glue a couple of these together after I do the strips. I mean, a couple of boards wide is what I meant. So let me do some figuring and then we'll figure out how much of this board we need. Alright, the first thing I'll do is plane this down. I cut this so I can get 3 lengths in. I only need 2 and a little, but that's how it is with woodworking. I'll take that out on the next passes after it's glued up. Alright, now I went over to the joiner and I jointed a straight edge so that I can run this along the table saw. And then I'm going to rip these to 1 3/4 and I should be able to get 3. Now as you look at the end grain here, I've swapped these, and so this one goes up and then this one goes down the other way, and then I put the clear one in the center and I cut the ends off so I could see it. So now we're going to need about 7 of these wide. Yeah. So what I'll have to do is cut these approximately the length of the cutting board plus a little, like maybe 19. So we'll do 19 here, 19 there, and then we'll add 1 more. And then we'll glue it to our rough final width. And I'll do that next. Here you can see I've got some up, some down, some heartwood, some sapwood, and I tried to balance it out as best I could. So the next step is to glue these together, and then we'll start cutting some strips. Alright, let's apply a little glue here. It's the glue surfaces. Okay, I'll clean up the edges a little bit and let those set. Now I've taken it out of the clamps, and before I do the end cutting or anything like that, what I need to do now is run it through the surface planer to take into account the variances in thickness and get this nice and flat. So it is going to make it a little thinner, but that's okay. Alright, that came out pretty nice. So the next thing I'm going to do is trim off this end and square it off, and then we'll cut it to strips. Notice from my initial cuts, I don't have this against the fence. I have a stop block that gets me the proper depth, and then when I pull that forward, it is away from the fence to prevent kickback on this wide board. Now that the board is narrower, I can move on to going directly against the fence with a push block. So now what we want to do is we want to turn these on the end grain and then vary the orientation. And then I may have mixed these around a bit when I took them off the saw. There, we can kind of track it a little bit easier. So let's see what our dimension. This is more of a square. Be about 13.5 by 12. So I wanted it a little more of a obvious rectangle, but I didn't quite get that right. I need a few more boards. And so when you're cutting it the long way, I had made an edge grain board previously, and so for whatever reason in my mind, I was doing it the length of the edge board. But when you're doing it on end, then you have to take the thickness that you're doing and then multiplying that by the number to get the length. And so instead of going on really thick butcher block, I'm making just a 1 inch instead of your typical, like that, because that's what I chose to do. So anyway, it's a little bit more of a square, but that's okay. So now the next thing to do is to glue this up again, and in this direction. So I need to fix anything that's not quite right. I feel a little bit of a ridge here. Oh, it's snipe. Interesting. So now I have a decision. Because I knew I had one board had a snipe, but this flaw, I guess we put that on top. You would see it on the bottom, but you wouldn't see it on the top. That's probably how to fix that. So I've done a dry fit to see how these are going together, and I'm clamping them down. I've had to rearrange a couple of the boards, and so I've got like a little gap here. I'm thinking that, that I can probably squeeze, I can squeeze that out. And that's what I'm looking for, is that I don't want a problem after I apply the glue, because it would be impossible to fix. Alright, so let's unclamp these, and then I'll arrange them and clamp them back up in exactly this order. Alright, so put this one off to the side, and then we'll tip everything back, and then we'll tip everything forward. Alright, so glue on all this, and tip them forward. Okay, so there's one joint. That's what I saw. I saw this, and so this looks like a little bit of glue to not get in there. So I'm going to try and open this up, put glue in, and then it'll squeeze back together. I had 2 of them like that. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is I want to see if I can fix these 2 and really work that into that crack. And now that's Get our glue going. Alright, got a couple of hairs there. Now we're ready to keep that thing, and then these all go forward. And then a third clamp in the middle. Alright, I'll wipe some of this off and then let it set. Alright, I've taken out the clamp, and now I need to square up these edges. And I could use my sled on my table saw, that's fine. But I've got this quite large miter saw. And now the next step is to sand it pretty aggressively. You can't run this through a planer not effectively, not end grain. So I'm going to start out with 40 grit. Now I'll use my router to put in a cove detail. Right now I'm going to put some mineral oil on this, my favorite part of the whole process. Well, after a couple coats of mineral oil and allowing it to dry a bit, here's the end result. And here's that other board that I made last week, and I also showed how I made this one if you want to check out that video as well. So anyway, I'll see you next time.